I'm Jane Bell, I'm Chief Executive of Shared Lives South West. The other hat that I wear is that I'm also the chair of the regional network of Shared Life Services. There are 12 Shared Life Services in the South West, of which we are the largest and the only independent scheme. But if you are wanting to know about Shared Life Services where you are, there is a scheme in every local authority area in the South West region. At the back there's piles of leaflets and our annual reviews, and also the directory that has all the contact details for all the Shared Life schemes. They are not all doing parents with a learning disability services at the moment. That's partly because they don't know what interest there is, and it does need a sort of caucus of enthusiasm and people to get together to help those Shared Life schemes. Thank you, Janice. So Shared Life South West, we're a charity. We work in the southwest of England. We're currently supporting 300 plus people. That's about 270 people, predominantly with a learning disability, living full-time in a shared lives arrangement. And then probably varies a lot, about another 100 or so people who regularly access shared lives as a form of short break or respite for their carers. We are one of the largest shared life schemes in the UK. We've been around for 10 years, and we are independent. We've never been part of a local authority. Within the South West, the other schemes, there are two who are now part of a community interest company. So they've been outsourced with all provider services from their local authority, which is Swindon and Bath. Everything else is still part mainly of the learning disability team. So we do have a bit of advantage that when we wake up in the morning and go, wouldn't it be good if we worked with parents with a learning disability, we can start doing it. I think it's much harder for the very small schemes to do that. So we offer long-term short breaks. We support people with a learning disability, mental health problems, older people. We're doing a lot of short break work for people with dementia, and obviously the work with vulnerable parents. So we wouldn't just offer it to parents with a learning disability, any vulnerable parent who is seeking a service which combines some form of accommodation with support. We've supported a number of long and short-term parents with a learning disability placements. And we could have supported more, but we get involved quite often and it falls by the wayside. And with apology, I hope I'm not going to offend anybody in the whole of the presentation, but those have all fallen by the wayside when the possibility of that placement within Shared Lives has gone up the line within children's services, and either got to a manager or to the legal department, and then it's not got any further because it's deemed to be quite high risk, and I'll explain why in a minute. Our website address is on there. There's lots of leaflets at the back about us. Shared Lives. Who in the room has ever heard of Shared Lives? Oh, you've no idea how joyous that is. Normally everyone goes, no, never heard of it. So you will know we are a personalised, community-based sort of social model. We are your secret little gem hidden away. Lots of people haven't heard of it or haven't used it. Shared Lives is delivered by approved carers who have to be part of a Shared Lives scheme. So we're the scheme, we're registered with CQC. We're registered with CQC because we are a provider of personal care. That's where we come in under the registration. The individual carers are not individually approved and registered with CQC, as long as they're part of the scheme, and the scheme is what's registered. And the basic premise is the person wanting the support lives with and shares the family life of the Shared Lives carer. They are a fully participating, active member of that family. And for a lot of people, they go, oh, family care, well, that all sounds a bit paternalistic, it's a bit looking after, it's not very modern. It's actually one of the most enabling services I've ever come across, and the things that people have been supported to achieve in their lives is quite phenomenal when they've actually got some very dedicated one-to-one support that isn't on the clock, isn't by the hour, is actually part of the people who love and care for them. And sometimes we get into trouble sometimes about talking about it in that way, as you know, where are the boundaries, how do you deal with all of that? Our carers are really good at working out those boundaries, and quite a lot of the time they set those further than you might think would be a good idea, but that's actually what makes the difference. As a way of living and a choice, a lifestyle, to choose to live with somebody else as part of their family is actually a very empowering thing for people. There will be people who go, family not likely, because their idea of family has been very, very the opposite of that. And to step into another family would be a very big ask. One of the key things about Shared Lives is that we are a service for adults. We start at 18 plus, although we do have 16 plus who are in transition from children's services into adult care. We can take foster carers who are going to stay with the person, they want to carry on supporting the person who they've had with them, and they can become Shared Lives carers and it can carry on from there. We are not registered with Ofsted. Our carers are not registered as foster carers. They don't need to be because they are not providing a service to a child. That's not what we're about. We're about providing services to adults. That's usually the bit that, as it goes up the line, gets us into difficulties, and we usually get asked, are you Ofsted registered? Well, we can't place this child with you. At that point, there is no placing of a child taking place. There's no care order in place. You're placing an adult who happens to have a child and happens to have a specific need of parenting support and support for their own needs as a person with a learning disability. There are 154 UK schemes and they are all predominantly learning disability. So what do you get if you go into Shared Lives? First of all, you get a place to live for the adult and the child in a normal family home, sharing all aspects of family life, long or short term. So long term, it's very rare we do enter into a completely open-ended arrangement these days just because of the funding implications. And Janice will probably tell you a bit more about that when we give you an example. The person with a learning disability, they get all the usual support we would supply to that person within Shared Lives. So Shared Lives is set up to support the needs of the person with a learning disability, to live their lives to the full, achieve all the things they want to do. Plus, they get a specific set of package of support around their parenting needs, because that's probably the primary reason that it's been put in place. It can start from pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, birth partnering, mostly the referrals we are getting at the other end of the spectrum, when a child, there is already a child, and most commonly, what I tend to get at the moment is phone calls from frantic solicitors who are trying to find a service that they can offer up in a court proceeding to try and put the brakes on in some way, or as a last-ditch attempt to say if we could find the right support environment, it would actually be possible for this person to have their child. Those are very difficult ones. We try really hard, but it's very difficult. And I have spent some happy hours wandering around different courts, explaining to judges at the last hour what Shared Lives is. And you can imagine that's quite difficult to intervene at that point. And they stand there looking at me, wondering what I'm doing there. And I have to keep explaining I am not a party in this process. I'm just a provider with a service that might work. And we've been asked, what is successful? What's a successful placement? And I think there's an impression that a successful placement would be service user gets to keep their baby. Actually, for me, that isn't a successful placement. For us, a successful Shared Lives placement is the person with a learning disability is given an opportunity to parent in an environment that gives them the best possible, normal, natural surroundings to do that in. They may not end up keeping their child. That isn't our decision. We may not agree with the decisions, and having been sat on the floor outside Exeter Court recently in tears with a person with a learning disability and our Shared Lives carer, and within 5 minutes of the court process is finishing, all the professionals had disappeared, I sit there and go, I don't know whether that was the right decision, but it's not my decision to make. We are neutral in this, and that we have something to offer that we think might plug a gap. And we are trying really hard not to be fighting for the adult or actually become, because that doesn't help anyone, it certainly doesn't help in the court process. So importantly, the adult retains parental responsibility for the child. So this is usually something we'll be trying to get set up before a care order has been made. There is a complicated legal way in which you could actually do a placement with parents after a care order has been made, but it's not ever been tested. It's theoretical at the moment. We don't know of any placements into Shared Lives that use the placement with parents part of making a care order. We are not an assessment service, so you wouldn't send somebody to a Shared Lives setting for a 12-week parenting assessment, because our carers are not about that. Having said that, we do offer a very normal environment for an assessment to take place in. So if you were using an independent assessment approach, to actually be able to try and do that within a normal household setting, where that person with a learning disability does have access to some of the things that all the rest of the community has, people in their networks who might offer them a bit of support. And it's a normal family home with lots of comings and goings and everything else. So we do think we would be able to offer insights on how the parent is managing into an assessment process, but we definitely don't want to compromise our carer, because we need to make very clear what the relationship between is a shared lives carer and the person with a learning disability is. And if you actually say, well, part of what they do is report back on you, we've already blown that. So we wouldn't say we're an assessment service, but we might be able to create an environment in which some assessment material could be gathered. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Janice, who's going to tell you a little bit about Anna and Liam, who you can see on the screen.
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me. Anna was referred to us in July last year. We'd had a couple of long, complicated phone calls with a social worker prior to that. Basically, Anna and Liam have both agreed, or Anna's agreed to have their names used. Anna had been through a 12-week parenting assessment in a foster placement, and although she was parenting quite well, she wouldn't have been able to parent completely independently. She didn't have family support to do that. Part of the difficulties were they wanted a guarantee that we would be able to support Anna until Liam was 18. Unfortunately, we said we can't do that. And there were several reasons, apart from foster carers, shared lives carers' lives change, everybody's lives moves on. Anna may gain those skills to parent independently. And lastly, the funding might be cut, which is what often happens. The other biggest barrier was funding, because the funding for us generally comes through adults, but it can be joint funded between children and adults. There was an excellent proactive social worker who pushed and pushed, and it went right up through the ranks, and actually it was agreed that it would be a joint funded ongoing process. Basically, we worked with children's, and there was a long agreement drawn up initially alongside our shared lives plan, which Anna had to agree that she would work with everybody. The professionals that had been involved, like special parenting and the advocacy service, remained involved, so there were no changes. She continued to be supported by everybody that she knew, and she has grown and developed amazingly. The shared lives carer worked mainly on her confidence and self-esteem, in lots of the things that Debbie had been saying, in promoting her self-esteem, making her realise she was a good person and a good mum, and those skills continue to develop. We think it will take a little bit longer, but she is really part of that family. She goes everywhere with them, she's had holidays with them, and she has really enjoyed her experience, and Liam has developed really well. One of the best things for us was actually when we were at the joint agency inter-protocol meeting, somebody who had assessed Anna at the pre-birth stage actually came up and asked me if it was her. They couldn't believe it was the same person because she looked so different and she was so confident. So obviously for Anna it has worked really well.
Great, thank you, Jen. Obviously we're going to tell you the success stories. I can tell you some of the ones that haven't worked out. And again, it's whether what you count as success. The very first case that we had, which my colleague Linda, so Janice is our lead in Cornwall on Parents with a Learning Disability and Shared Lives, and Linda is our lead in Devon for the same role. When the very first case we had, a young lady with a very troubled family was about to have the baby and basically had been told in no uncertain terms that if she didn't leave troubled family and troubled boyfriend, she would not have any chance of keeping her child. So a placement was sought by a great social worker who just sort of went, I wonder if Shared Lives could do this. And we went, well, we'll give it a go. We didn't know anything about how it would all fit together, hence the running around the court and trying to work out who was who and what was what. But essentially, she went into a Shared Lives placement. That carer was her birthing partner. She was able, after a court process, to bring the baby home with her. And she stayed with the Shared Lives carer for about 6 or 7 months, then started thinking she might like to get back the dodgy boyfriend. At which point it was made very clear to her that's a choice that you're making. So you can stay here and do this, or you can make that choice, and this is the consequence. She made a choice to actually go back to where she was with her boyfriend, and therefore she gave up her child. But actually she had the opportunity to be a parent and make a choice. So I would still say that was a successful placement, even though the outcome might be what you would describe as success. The recent case where we've had a young lady who has very recently an adoption order has been made, and that's been appealed several times in terms of process. I think that's probably quite an unfair outcome. She's still actually getting support from a Shared Lives carer because her own emotional needs, her own learning disability probably wouldn't warrant, she wouldn't probably be eligible. But actually where she is right now, she needs a lot of support to process what's actually happened to her. So again, it may not be successful in terms of she has not got her child with her, but in terms of supporting her and what happens to her next, actually it's proving to be a very successful way of supporting her. So the process, we take referrals from adult social care predominantly, but we would also, if somebody from Children's Services or if there's an inquiry from a legal representative, somebody said, have you got a placement that might work for X? We will look at the carers that we've got and we check it against our vacancies. It's very true to say, even though we've got 250 carer households, not all of them could do this work, and not all of them have a vacancy sitting vacant. The whole idea is that we have our houses filled up. Nonetheless, we have quite a few people who are interested in this, and quite often it's not to do with the parenting bit. It's actually just, would it be a good match? It's the normal shared lives things. We match on whether people would enjoy spending time together. If you find, a guy who really likes steam trains, the most important thing you can find in a shared lives family is one who likes steam trains. That's actually going to make shared lives work, not all the care needs matching up. You do get to that, but actually you have to look at who might like to live with who. And we do find in some ways that when we approach some of our carers who might not have thought about this work, and particularly those who we know who've had experience either as foster carers at some point, or just families we know who've done a lot of child rearing, that actually they may have some transferable skills and it might work. We collect up a lot of information about the parent, about the child, about where we are in court proceedings, what are the concerns of everybody, what are the perceived risks about that parent with that child, so that we can get a very detailed picture. If we can match it with a vacancy, then a Shared Lives coordinator, someone like Janice or Linda or one of the team, would arrange some introductory visits to see how that would work. We then haggle about the money, and then we put a care plan and we agree the responsibilities of everybody. Which agencies are going to be involved? What is everybody going to do? How is this going to work? Particularly to try and make sure that there are not 22 different agencies stomping through our Shared Lives carers' home, because this service is actually happening in somebody's home. So you're really trying to work through making this work for Shared Lives. Our carers, just so you know a bit about them, they have to go through a very comprehensive assessment process. That takes minimum of 3 months, sometimes a bit more. There's an awful lot of visiting goes on where we would talk to all members of the family. If they identified that they wanted to do this piece of work right up front, we would obviously then be collecting evidence about their ability to do that. We have to do DBSs and many other sorts of referencing on them. They go through pre-approval and post-approval training. So they would do all of the normal stuff our Shared Lives carers do around safeguarding adults' mental capacity, all of that you can see there. But also we're looking at the way in which we would support the carers who go to the parents with LD work. And the sorts of areas training, safeguarding children, parenting support skills and communication, training, some sort of training around attachment and boundaries. Because obviously here we're making sure that the Shared Lives carer knows what their role is. One of the interesting things we've had is where we've had people come into this work who have very recently been foster carers, that bit's proved quite tricky. Because actually we had to say, you are not the parent, you haven't got the parental responsibility, the parent has. And you have to support that. You cannot dive in and take over the minute you think there's something going wrong. You have to have a strategy that's around supporting the parent. And that, again, that ability for them not to dive in and intervene and take over is something that sometimes can make children's services feel, well, what if it is going off the rails? What if there are concerns? I can tell you the first people who would be on the phone to us, if they were concerned about the welfare of the child, would be our carers, because it's happening in their house and they feel very, very responsible and accountable for it. So we don't think that's a real risk, but we understand why it might be perceived to be by people who are exploring the model. And making sure carers have an understanding of the court process, just so they know what the adult might be going through and what that is, and if they go to an interim court hearing, what might happen and what that person might be feeling when they come out of that. And really just so they've got a real good understanding of what they do. So our carers may sound a little bit like, they're nice people who take, lovely people who gather people up and take them into their homes. They usually are, but actually there's a lot of training and professionalism going on behind the background, and they are backed up by us as an agency. I'm going to whiz past the legal framework, probably because Nadine will find all sorts of holes in it. And it's just too complicated. But the two things is basically we're talking about people where there isn't a care order in place. I am no solicitor, that's for sure. And therefore, this is just about placing people, making arrangements for children to live with their parents somewhere that's going to be useful to them. Or there's the placing with parents bit at the bottom, but I'm conscious of time, and you've all been here a long time. Costs. Everyone always wants to know how much does it cost. This is how it works out, basically. The service user, adult, they pay rent and household costs. We support them to claim all their benefits. We help them maximise the benefits. And if they are going to need 2 rooms in a shared lives carer's house, we can claim for a 2-room housing benefit rate. If it's a baby, on the whole, that's not a requirement. If it's an older child, then quite often we would be asked to find 2 rooms. That limits our pool, because sometimes shared lives carers won't have that accommodation available. So basically, they're paying like they would if they were living out in their own flat, renting somewhere. We then pay our carers a fee for the care and support they provide to the adult. In our normal service, there is a banding level depending on the support needs of the adult. And then we specifically look at the parenting bit of that. How much parenting support? What sort of parenting support? Is our carer actually going to need to be pretty much round the clock supporting nighttime feeds and all sorts of things like that? And we add a premium on, which is the parenting support bit. We then charge a management fee to whoever is the responsible local authority, which covers the bit that we do of making and monitoring the actual arrangement. And for these cases, that's quite a lot. And we also try and act as the buffer from the 22 other agencies who might like to be involved, so that we can try and coordinate and help our carers work out all these different people and their roles. So there's usually quite a lot of work involved.